Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for coming here to Hudson Institute, and I want to thank our online viewers for tuning in today as we discuss the future of the transatlantic community, Russia, and Ukraine. I'm joined by two fascinating and well-known speakers. To my left is the Right Honorable Sir Liam Fox, MP. The full title there. A medical doctor by early profession, entered the House of Commons in 1992 and held various ministerial roles in the major government and also was Defense Secretary under David Cameron and then Trade Secretary under Theresa May. The most important thing you need to know about Liam Fox, though, is that he was my boss for 5 years in London. So that's a very important thing to note. But most importantly, and probably most relevant to today's discussion, Liam has always been one of the staunchest critics of Putin's Russia in UK politics. And that's why it's so great to have Liam here today to participate in this event. Of course, our main guest today is Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who needs no introduction whatsoever, but I'll give him an introduction anyway. He was one of the staunchest and earliest critics of Vladimir Putin's rule in Russia. Of course, he's a successful businessman who at one time was probably Russia's wealthiest man and led Yukos Oil, one of the largest oil companies largest oil producers in the world. In 2003, at the point in his career where he started raising questions about rampant corruption inside the Kremlin and inside Russia, he famously had this encounter with Vladimir Putin that was on television, challenging him about allegations of corruption and incompetence. And you can actually go on YouTube and watch this exchange. And that exchange led to his imprisonment for 10 years on dubious tax fraud charges. He was finally released in 2013, made it to London, where he lives now in exile, and he devotes his time and energy and resources to raising awareness about what's happening in Russia, countering Vladimir Putin's rule, and fighting corruption to hopefully someday usher in a new era of reform and democracy inside the Russian Federation. So with that, I want to turn it over to my friend and former boss, Liam Fox, to kick the discussion off.
Thank you. So Mikhail, born in 1963, a Jewish father, a Russian Orthodox mother. Despite the fact that they themselves were quite strongly anti-communist, you had a very traditional, at the time, Russian upbringing. You were in Komsomol, you did all the right things, and yet you were one of the first people to understand the economic potential of glasnost and perestroika. You began with your cafe, worked your way through computers, finance, banking, and then oil to become 16th on the richest billionaires list in Forbes by 2003. Tell us, to what do you attribute that economic success? Is it your natural business flair? Is it your driving ambition? Or was it a lucky break and just getting the right time in history?
Я своим друзьям, когда они празднуют дни рождения, всегда желаю удачи, потому что я считаю, что удача – это 99%.
When I'm celebrating my friends' birthdays with them, I always wish them good luck. Because frankly, I think good luck is like 99% of it.
You worked as an economic advisor in the first Yeltsin government, and you were reportedly, you can tell if it's true, on the barricades with the attempted coup by the hardliners. At that time, you published a paper called The Man with the Ruble, which was effectively a capitalist manifesto, which is quite far from Komsomol, it has to be said. When you became very wealthy, you weren't the traditional Russian playboy, you weren't buying yachts or buying up large parts of the south of France, like lots of them. And yet the crash in 1998 showed you that capitalism could bring losses as well as profits. What were your thoughts around that time, and were you disillusioned by capitalism and how you had seen it progress in Russia to that point?
Мое поколение российских предпринимателей в тот момент не особо успевало обзавестись яхтами и самолетами.
Well, my generation of Russian entrepreneurs of that era weren't exactly in any position to be buying up yachts and real estate at that time.
Потому что для нас открылась такая игра, играть в которую было интереснее всего на свете.
Because we were suddenly being allowed to participate in a game that was the most exciting thing in the world for us.
Да, на баррикадах был в 91 году, потом в 93 году, так сказать, потом в 96-м было тоже все достаточно опасно, но это же было интересно.
Yes, I was on the barricades in 91, 93, and in 96 there were also things happening, but it was because this was all so interesting.
Для меня капитализм – это то, что позволяет людям моего типа принимать на себя ответственность за решения и воплощать их. И это я ни на что не поменяю.
For me, capitalism means an opportunity for people like myself to shoulder responsibilities and to bring them to life. And that's something I wouldn't forsake for the world.
Now, in 2001, that's when you really started the campaign about fighting corruption and bringing about reform to Russia. You started the Open Russia, and you've continued with this work in some form or another since then in 2001. But what was your motivation at the time? At what point did you realize something's not right and I need to do something about it? Can you tell us about Open Russia and your decision to establish that organization?
На самом деле, в открытой России вот это вот все социальное интерпренерство было результатом 98 года.
Actually, Open Russia and all the social entrepreneurship was all a result of 1998.
Потому что в 98 году я увидел вот реально, что бизнес – это не всегда игра.
Because in 1998, I saw for the first time that business is not always a game.
Иногда это судьбы десятков тысяч, сотен тысяч людей, за которых ты персонально несешь ответственность.
Because sometimes it's the fates of tens, no, hundreds of thousands of people for whom you carry personal responsibility.
И это тяжело.
And that's a heavy burden.
Вот. И да, после этого началось то, что я продолжаю до сегодняшнего дня. Это работа с образованием, с поддержкой социальных проектов. Но это вот в тот момент вошло в голову.
So that's where it all began, and all these educational and social projects that I'm involved in to this day all date back to then. That was the catalyst.
So in this period where you were getting your great ascent economically and through business, someone else was coming up through the political ranks, and that was Putin himself. So in 1991, he resigns from the KGB. In 1996, he moves from St. Petersburg to Moscow to become Yeltsin's first deputy manager. By 98, he's back at the helm of the FSB. He then, the next year, is the Russian Security Council secretary, then prime minister. A year later, Yeltsin resigns, and Putin is made effective president. When did you, in all of this, first meet Putin? And what were your first impressions of him?
Первый раз я его увидел, когда он уже стал исполнять обязанности президента.
The first time I met him, he was already acting president.
И я был им обманут и вдохновлен, как многие другие.
And I, like many others, was deceived and inspired by him.
Мне он показался, в отличие от Ельцина, который был царем, он мне показался очень современным таким руководителем.
In contrast to Yeltsin, who was a tsar, he seemed to me to be a really modern managerial type.
Мне казалось, ну вот наше поколение пришло, наконец, к управлению страной. Вот теперь-то уж мы рванем.
As I saw it, or my feeling was, all right, finally our generation's turn has come to be in power in Russia. Now we're going to really start moving forward.
А я не знал, что в тот же момент он, выступая перед коллегией ФСБ, говорил о том, что ваше задание выполнено, а мы пришли к власти.
Little did I know that at this very time, he spoke to the collegium of the FSB and told them, congratulations, guys, job well done. We're in power now.
And, well, some of us have always taken the view that once KGB, always KGB, even if you change the names. And this interaction with you was to prove important because in October 2003, you were arrested after the arrest of Platon Lebedev, your partner, charged with fraud, tax evasion, and a whole range of other ill-defined economic crimes. And of course, just before this, the Kremlin had published Stanislav Bukovsky's The Plot of the Oligarchs, which suggested that there was a plan to oust Putin and to replace the presidency with a parliamentary democracy in Russia, which of course is a classic KGB, FSB way of doing business. And it's fair to say that the markets at that time didn't take your arrest very well, and they questioned the stability of the Russian economy and also the dependability of Putin as an economic partner. Now, given what you said about your transition of your views on Putin, by this point, were you expecting your arrest? Did you expect that Putin would go back to the old ways of the KGB? And if you did expect it, when did you expect it?
Во-первых, очень важно, не надо воспринимать Путина в основном как руководителя спецслужбы.
Okay, first I want to clarify one very important thing. It would be a mistake to view Putin first and foremost as a head of an organization in the intelligence community.
Наверное, среди представителей спецслужб есть и такие люди, но это необычный для этой службы человек.
Now, maybe there are other people like him in the among the leadership of the world's intelligence community, but they are the exception rather than the rule.
Это человек, который отвечал за взаимодействие между спецслужбами Санкт-Петербурга и бандитами Санкт-Петербурга.
This is the person who was responsible for liaison between St. Petersburg's special services and St. Petersburg's organized crime.
И в его окружении до сегодняшнего дня достаточное количество людей из организованной преступности.
And in his inner circle to this day, there's quite a few people who come from the organized crime community.
Я этого, считайте меня наивным человеком, я этого не понимал даже после ареста.
Call me naive. I did not understand this. Even after I'd been arrested, I still didn't get this.
Для меня, когда во-первых, ареста я ожидал, потому что до этого он арестовал моего бизнес-партнера.
Well, to answer your question, I was expecting to be arrested. He had arrested my business partner shortly before that, after all.
Вот, и я здесь был в Америке и сказал тогда такому очень известному конгрессмену, с которым мы много общались, Тому Ландесу, о том, что да, вероятность моего ареста достаточно большая.
I was in the U.S. at the time, and I met with a relatively well-known American congressman at the time, Tom Lantos, and I told him, yes, the probability that I will be arrested is very high indeed.
Вот, но тем не менее, я считал, что это часть политического противостояния. Я не видел это как способ ограбления, в том числе акционеров ЮКСа.
But even then, I thought that this would be just a move in a political standoff. I did not think that this would actually be a way of robbing the thousands and thousands of Yuko shareholders, that this would be brigandry.
It kind of answers the next question I was going to ask you, which was Leonid Nevzlim, who worked with you, of course, at Menitat Bank. He told you to take your money and go abroad and start business there. He went to Israel to do that. You decided to stay in Russia. Why?
Наверное, странно будет звучать, но когда ты много лет руководишь большой компанией, ты чувствуешь себя ответственным перед людьми, которые там работают.
This may sound strange, but if you run a large company for a long period of time, you start feeling responsible for the people who work for you.
И я прекрасно понимал, что если я уеду, этим людям скажут, что они работали на преступников, что они сами преступники, что эти преступники уехали и их бросили, и они в это поверят.
And I knew that were I to leave, the people who stay behind would be told, you've been working for criminals, you yourselves are criminals, and that they would believe that.
А для меня это было абсолютно невыносимо. Вот что те десятки и сотни тысяч людей, с которыми я работал много лет, поверят в то, что они работали на самом деле на преступников, для меня это было абсолютно невыносимо.
And that's something that I just couldn't stomach. I couldn't stomach the notion that the tens and hundreds of thousands of people who had worked for me all those years would think that they'd been working for criminals all along. I couldn't do that.
И я думал, что суд мне даст трибуну.
And I thought that the court would give me a platform.
И суд дал мне трибуну.
The court did give me a platform.
В тот момент. Сейчас уже они это откорректировали.
Back then it did. Now they realize their mistake and they don't do that anymore.
So you had a 10-month trial, after which you and Lebedev were both sentenced to 9 years in penal colonies. Can you briefly describe to us what that's like? What's life, in one paragraph, what's life like in a Russian penal colony? You can just say not nice.
Это лучше, чем было в ГУЛАГе.
This is better than the Gulag,
Вот, но это по-прежнему неприятно.
but it's still not very pleasant.
And while you were there, you still challenged the authorities. So when Lebedev was put into isolation, you went on hunger strike on his behalf. And what I'm trying to find out from you is, did you understand what risk that was putting you in to do that? And what was your motivation to take on the authorities while you're already in prison?
Я в тюрьме проводил 4 голодовки.
I conducted 4 hunger strikes while in prison.
2 из них сухие, то есть когда отказываешься от воды и от еды, и 2 обычные.
2 ordinary ones and 2 so-called dry hunger strikes, where you refuse water as well as food.
Я выиграл все 4.
I won all 4.
То есть мои требования удовлетворили.
That is, my demands were satisfied.
Это было каждый раз, потому что я тщательно думал, какие требования выдвигать и правильный ли для этого момент.
This happened because each time I thought very carefully about exactly what demands I should make and whether this is the appropriate time to be making them.
И я точно для себя знал, что я не могу проиграть, и если мои требования не удовлетворят, я должен буду умереть.
And I was fully cognizant of the fact that losing was not an option, that if my demands are not met, I'm going to have to die.
Та голодовка, о которой вы говорите, она была потому, что начальник российских тюрем, всех, сказал, что он отправляет моего друга Платона Лебедева в карцер, и он там останется до смерти.
The hunger strike to which you referred took place when the head of the entire Russian prison system announced that he was sending my friend Platon Lebedev to the karzer, which is a Russian word that comes from German that means dungeon. He was sending him to the dungeon where he would stay for the rest of his life.
И Платон был болен, я знал, что он реально не выдержит.
Platon was ill, and I knew that he would not survive the dungeon.
И я посчитал, что они в тот момент не могут себе позволить 2 трупа.
And I calculated that they couldn't afford 2 dead bodies at that particular point.
And even after that, you played this sort of deadly cat and mouse game with the authorities in 2005. In August 2005, you announced that you were going to run for parliament, taking advantage of the loophole that your case was still in appeal. And yet, just 2 months later, you were transferred to Krasnokomersk, a labor camp, where you were attacked by one of the inmates who later said that he was forced by the guards to do so and encouraged by, quote, unknown persons who came to visit him in the camp. You knew that a number of, quite a few, opponents of Putin have either been murdered or disappeared. Did you at any point feel that you were never going to come out of prison alive?
К сожалению, в 2006 году, то есть через 3 года после ареста, я решил, что меня в тюрьме оставят на всю жизнь.
Alas, yes, in 2006, that is 3 years after my arrest, I came to the conclusion that they would leave me in prison for the rest of my life, yes.
И он бы оставил, но мне просто драматически повезло.
And indeed, Putin would have left me there forever. I just was really, really lucky.
Слушайте, тогда 10 лет казалось, что дали большой срок.
And actually, back then, a 10-year sentence was considered wow, really long.
Сегодня моему товарищу Владимиру Кормурзе дали 25 лет.
Today, my comrade Vladimir Karamurza was given 25.
И это теперь как бы нормально.
And now that's the norm. That's considered normal.
Of course, every time you were due to come up for parole, for example, new charges were brought against you. And this happened on more than one occasion. Then by 2009, President Obama visited Russia, brought up your case. It was brought up at the European Court of Human Rights. It was brought up in the UK Parliament and a lot of other places. Did you think that this international attention made it inevitable that the charges that came in 2009 and 10 would arrive? Is this how the Russian thugocracy responds to international opinion?
Здесь есть такой ответ. Здесь есть плюсы, есть минус.
Well, the answer to this question is there are pluses and there are minuses to such a situation.
Международная поддержка придает заключенным значимость для режима.
International support gives a prisoner significance in the eyes of the regime.
И режим, конечно, так сказать, стремится их прижать еще больше.
And the regime obviously then tries to quash them even more fiercely.
То есть это типа дорогой заложник.
In other words, this is an expensive hostage for them.
Вот, но при этом у них пропадает готовность тебя убивать.
But in the process, they lose the readiness to kill you if they would like to.
И я считаю, что вот эта вот международная поддержка политзаключенных очень важна, потому что они выйдут, когда помрет Путин, но они до этого должны дожить.
So I feel that international pressure vis-a-vis political prisoners is very important. These people will get out as soon as Putin dies. The trick is to make sure they stay alive until then.
Now, we're going to come and talk more about Putin and Ukraine contemporary events, but just to finish up on this episode of your life, tell us about the circumstances of your so-called amnesty and your release. Why was it in Putin's interest to release you when he did? And was any bargain made with Putin to achieve this?
Просто драматически повезло.
I'll repeat. I was really, really lucky.
Было 3 месяца окно.
There was a 3-month window.
Когда Путин хотел провести успешно Олимпиаду и еще не готов был нападать на Украину.
When Putin wanted to have a spectacular Olympics, but wasn't ready yet to attack Ukraine.
И благодаря Дитриху Геншеру и Ангеле Меркель, так сказать, в списке на освобождение оказался я и девочки из Pussy Riot.
And thanks to the work done by Dietrich Genscher and Angela Merkel, the list of people to be released included my name and that of the girls from Pussy Riot.
Always name dropping. Now, I've already been sanctioned by the Russians because of what I've said about Putin. So, Luke, why don't you ask a little bit about...
Well, I've been sanctioned as well. In fact, Hudson Institute as an organization has also been sanctioned. But yeah, Liam asked you about what it was like when you first met Vladimir Putin and what he was like at that point in the late 1990s and your perceptions of him then. But going forward to later in your life and even to today, what can you tell us about the man Vladimir Putin as a leader of Russia? Are there any constraints on him that can deter his actions that we should be considering here in the United States or in Europe? Is he trying to build a legacy, or is he now just focused on preserving his power and his control?
Хороший вопрос. Я не могу со стопроцентной уверенностью сказать, что я полностью понимаю Путина.
It's a good question. I have to admit that I cannot say with 100% certainty that I understand Putin.
Но то, что я понимаю, позволяет предсказывать, во всяком случае, многие его шаги.
But what I do understand of him does allow me to predict many of the steps that he does take.
Надо сказать, что наследие, конечно, его волнует.
It should be said, yeah, legacy is something that does concern him.
Он об этом говорил, так сказать, и буквально недавно, и людям, которые, так сказать, ему близки.
He has spoken about this, and quite recently, and to people who are quite close to him.
При этом вот его типаж – это типаж, который лучше всего узнаваем из фильма «Крестный отец».
But his character, what he's like, the best way to understand what he's like is watch the movie The Godfather.
И я, так сказать, благодаря Путину знаю, в общем, достаточное количество бандитов.
And thanks to Putin, I actually know quite a few gangsters.
Я с ними провел много лет.
And I spent many years with them.
Вот. Многие из них под конец жизни задумываются о наследии.
And many of them, as they approach death, start thinking about legacy.
Но при этом удержание власти сейчас и сегодня для них играет все-таки основное значение.
But right now, today, holding on to power is the main thing that concerns them.
Many people, especially in the West, often describe the Russia we're facing today as a Cold War Russia, a Soviet Russia. I think this is completely misunderstanding the situation. I describe it more as an imperial Russia. And Putin behaves, he has 19th century ambitions, but as a 21st century leader, and I think this is dangerous. He'll be known as a serial aggressor against his neighbors, whether it's the Second Chechen War that he oversaw, Russia's invasion of Georgia in 2008, and many forget that Russia is still occupying 20% of Georgia's internationally recognized territory. And then, of course, we had the annexation of Crimea in 2014, which was the first time since 1990 that a leader used military force to annex part of another country when Saddam Hussein did it against Kuwait in 1990. And then, of course, we had the large-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So ultimately, what is Putin trying to achieve with all of this? Is this a distraction from his domestic problems? Or does he think that he can achieve imperial greatness like some of his predecessors 200 years ago were able to do?
Для людей его поколения и даже моего поколения, я на 10 лет моложе, родной страной является Советский Союз.
For people of his generation, and even for people of my generation, I'm 10 years younger than him, our homeland, the country that we were born in, that we're from, is the Soviet Union.
И с этой точки зрения он не воспринимает, конечно, Украину или Грузию как независимые страны.
So from that perspective, he doesn't see Ukraine or Georgia as fully independent countries as such.
И интересно заметить, что те, кому сейчас 35-40, уже воспринимают сегодняшнюю реальность.
It's interesting, today's 35 to 40-year-olds do accept the reality of today.
Да, то есть для них уже Украина – это другая страна.
For them, Ukraine is another country.
Тем не менее, если мы будем говорить о Путине, он 4 раза начинал войну именно в тот момент, когда ему нужно было решить его внутриполитические проблемы.
But if we speak about Putin, 4 times already he has started a war when he's had internal political problems that he needed to deal with.
То есть мы это можем увидеть прямо вот на графике. Мы видим падение популярности, начало войны, рост популярности. Падение популярности, начало войны, рост популярности. 4 раза так.
The statistical relationship can be shown on a graph. His popularity falls, he starts a war, popularity rises. Popularity falls, he starts a war, popularity rises. It's a one-to-one correlation.
И именно поэтому я говорю по поводу, так сказать, стремления многих к переговорам Путину. С Путиным 5-й раз он будет делать то же самое. Это просто для него модус операнди.
Anyway, and to those people who say, well, should we negotiate a settlement in the current war with Putin? I always say, there's going to be a 5th one. If this war ends, there will be a 5th one. This is his modus operandi.
Luke mentioned the first Gulf War, and of course, at that time there was some equivocation in the US, and Margaret Thatcher famously said to President Bush, "George, this is no time to go wobbly." There's been some debate in Congress in recent months about American support, continued American support for Ukraine. What happens if America goes wobbly? And what happens if Ukraine is defeated?
То, что мы сейчас видим у Это плохо прозвучит, но у Украины кончаются силы.
And this is not going to sound good, but what we are observing now is Ukraine is losing strength right now.
У России, у путинской России тоже не так много сил.
Putin's Russia doesn't have that much strength either.
Да, так сказать,
Forces.
но у Украины они кончаются быстрее.
But Ukraine is losing it faster.
Когда на каждые 10 путинских снарядов один украинский, ну, в общем, героизм не очень помогает.
When for each shell that Ukraine lobs in the Russian direction, the Russians lob 10 shells at Ukraine, heroism isn't going to save you.
К сожалению, так сказать, сейчас время, когда техника решает.
This, unfortunately, is a time when hardware decides matters.
Хотя героизм, конечно, тоже важен.
Although heroism is obviously important.
Без техники не работает.
But it doesn't work if you don't have the hardware to back you up.
То, как я вижу сегодняшние планы Путина, он ожидает, что Украина сломается без западной помощи в 2025 году.
As I see it, Putin is assuming that Ukraine will break by 2025 if it doesn't have Western aid.
С американской помощью он считает, что она все равно сломается, но в 26-м.
If American aid continues, he figures that Ukraine will still break only in 2026.
Это его позиция, и, так сказать, в общем, очень многие люди об этом говорят, в том числе публично.
This is his position, and a lot of people are talking about this, including publicly.
Та задача, которую он ставит перед военными на сегодняшний день, это захват всей левобережной Украины. Левобережной Украины.
The task that he has set before the military is to capture the Ukrainian left bank, that is the left bank of the Dnieper, the eastern half of the country.
Это приблизительно 40% территории.
So it's about 40% of the territory of the country.
Если ему это удастся, на этом история не остановится.
If he succeeds at this, that will not be the end of the story.
Его конечная цель 3/4 украинской территории, то есть кроме нескольких западных областей.
His ultimate goal is to get about 3/4 of Ukraine. That is everything but a few of the westernmost oblasts.
Надо понимать, что то, как путинская администрация сейчас работает с населением захваченных областей, приведет к тому, что он этих людей в течение 2 лет поставит в строй своей армии.
We can already see from the way that he's been acting with the populations of the territories that Russia already controls. We can see that within 2 years, he will have taken the population and turned it into soldiers in his army.
И мы видим на примере Луганской и Донецких областей, что стоимость жизни людей из этих областей для него 0.
And we can see from what's happening in Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast already that the lives of these people are worth absolutely zero to him.
И с политической точки зрения.
From a political point of view.
И куда он этих людей дальше направит, ну, так сказать, я считаю, что балтийские страны не зря беспокоятся.
And where he's going to direct these people to go next, well, let's put it this way. The Baltic states have every reason to be worried.
Вот. И еще раз, это из внутриполитических соображений.
But I repeat, all of this is being done out of internal political considerations for him.
Даже если он сегодня думает, что он без этого обойдется, он без этого не обойдется, потому что его политическая база сегодня – это крайние радикалы.
Even if, let's say, today he thinks that he can get by without doing any of this, he won't be able to get by without doing any of this, because his political base in Russia are extreme radicals.
Которые ими не были, но когда им платят на войне в 10 раз больше, чем они получали в обычной жизни, они ими стали.
They didn't used to be extreme radicals, but if they can earn 10 times more in the army than they do in civilian life, they become that.
Now, to bring this back to the US, and it's an election year, and don't feel that you have to answer this question, but 2008 Georgia, the annexation of Crimea, the invasion of Ukraine, all of them happened under democratic administrations in the US. Coincidence or no coincidence?
Вот в американскую политику я не полезу.
No, you're not going to drag me into a discussion of American politics.
Yeah, but you know, you have to forgive me for trying.
Я навсегда запомнил одну картинку, которая была опубликована, когда Трамп пришел к власти.
I will never forget a picture that was published when Trump came to power.
Путин сидит вот так вот, обхватив голову.
Putin is sitting there with his head in his hands.
И подписано: это тот, говорит, печальный момент, когда ты перестал быть самым непредсказуемым руководителем страны в мире.
And the caption is, that sad moment when you realized you're no longer the most unpredictable person in the world.
So when you were released from prison, you went to Germany, you did that famous press conference at the Checkpoint Charlie Museum, you thanked Genscher. The Swiss had done a great deal to help you during this period, including with your visa and so on. Yet you didn't decide to settle in Germany or Switzerland. You came and settled in the UK. Why the UK?
Мой офис все эти годы работал в Великобритании.
All of those years, my office was operating in Great Britain.
И я поехал в Швейцарию, потому что жена вот только-только устроила там детей в школу.
And I went to Switzerland because my wife had just gotten the kids into schools there.
И перевозить их сразу было как-то, тяжело.
And it would be difficult to drag them out of there just as they'd gotten settled in.
Я очень благодарен и Германии, и Швейцарии за помощь.
I am very grateful to both Germany and to Switzerland for what they did, for their help.
Вот, но когда я собрался переезжать в Лондон, мне один мой приятель сказал: не езжай туда.
But when I started getting ready to move to London, a friend of mine said to me, "Don't go there."
Я говорю: почему?
I say, "Why?"
Потому что, говорит, ты оттуда не вернешься, потому что Лондон это как Москва, только лучше.
He said, because then you'll never want to go back, because London, it's like Moscow, only better.
I'll try and take that in the right way. What now in your life's been you could make an easy mini series, a soap opera out of all of this, and it's fair to say you've not been a subtle critic in recent times of Putin. And last year you had 2 books came out. You had How Do You Slay a Dragon, a manual for startup revolutionaries, and the Russia Conundrum, How the West Fell for Putin's Power Gambit and How to Fix It with Martin Sixsmith. Putin's reach is great. We saw Litvinenko poisoned in London. We saw the Novichok poisoning of Skripal in Salisbury in London. How do you live a life knowing that sort of risk of murder by the Russian gangster state is always a threat?
Я 4 года провел в бараке, где было там от 30 до 150 человек, из которых приблизительно четверть сидела за убийство.
I spent 4 years living in a barrack which had anywhere from 30 to 150 other people in it, of whom roughly a quarter were there for murder.
Я провел еще 6 лет в камере, где ко мне подсаживали наркоманов.
I spent another 6 years in a prison cell where they would put in drug addicts with me,
которым оперативники давали наркотики в обмен на то, что они, так сказать, писали обо мне отчеты.
Whom the operatives were feeding drugs in return for them writing reports about me.
А потом не давали наркотики.
And then they would stop giving them the narcotics.
Вот, вы себе представляете, в каком настроении эти люди были?
You can imagine what a fine mood these people were in.
Вот, как я себя чувствую после этого на улицах Лондона? Хорошо себя чувствую.
So how do I feel now that I'm walking in the streets of London after that? Very good, thank you.
When I first met you, as I told you yesterday, a few years ago now, what struck me was that despite all the horrors that you've been through, you're a man who seems to have remarkably little bitterness in you. How is that possible?
Спасибо родителям, с нервами все в порядке.
I guess thanks to my parents, my nerves are just fine.
Вообще, жизнь в Советском Союзе для ребенка, она вообще так готовит к тюрьме, нормально.
You know, life for a child in the Soviet Union prepares you pretty well for prison.
Так сказать, пионерские лагеря, в общем, так сказать, ну, они для взрослого, наверное, это действительно очень хорошо, а для ребенка они так готовят нормально.
Anyway, the young pioneer camps, I guess an adult might think that they're nice, but like they really do prepare a kid for prison.
Вот, что интересно, в тюрьме ты риск вообще не воспринимаешь, потому что жизнь настолько тяжела, что, в общем, тебе твоя собственная оценка твоей собственной жизни близка к нулю.
You don't even really think about risk when you're in prison because life is just so hard that you stop really thinking about the value of your life as such.
Вот, но, тем не менее, это все равно интересно.
But still, it's an interesting experience.
Я, так сказать, я человек, который вот, которому интересно было жить в Советском Союзе, потом интересно было заниматься бизнесом, потом интересно было в тюрьме, а теперь интересно опять.
I guess I feel I've had an interesting life. It was interesting for me to live in the Soviet Union. It was interesting for me to be in the business world. Prison was interesting, and now what I'm doing now is interesting.
Well, interesting is in itself an interesting euphemism in all of that. So what now? What's the next episode in the Mikhail Khodorkovsky soap opera? What's left? What are your ambitions? What drives you? What have you got left to achieve?
Я убежден, что Россия изменится еще раз при моей жизни.
I am convinced that Russia is going to change yet again in my lifetime.
Я считаю, что никто из моих друзей, которые сейчас сидят в тюрьме, не просидят в тюрьме весь отведенный им срок.
And I'm convinced that none of my friends who are still locked up in prison are going to stay in prison to the end of their sentences.
Я считаю, что Путину осталось от 5 до 10 лет. К сожалению, это долго, но это не так долго.
I think Putin still got 5 to 10 years left. That's a long time, unfortunately, but not all that long.
Раньше я оценивал в этот срок меньше, но, увы, Америка перестала помогать Украине.
Earlier, I had thought that he had less time than that left, but alas, the United States stopped helping Ukraine.
Вот. Тем не менее, базовый вопрос, что будет в России после?
But still, the key question is, what will be in Russia after?
И здесь возможны два варианта.
And there are two possibilities here.
Первый вариант – на место Путина придет другой Путин, который первые несколько лет будет больше нравиться Америке.
Option one is that in Putin's place, there will come another Putin, who for the first few years, America is going to like more.
А потом опять нет.
And then after that, it will again not like.
Потому что централизованная Россия – это Россия, которой нужен внешний враг.
Because a centralized Russia is a Russia that needs an external enemy.
И внешний враг уже 500 лет на это место избирается Запад.
And for 500 years already, the role of the external enemy is played by the West.
А второй вариант – это федерализация и демократизация России.
A second option, however, is the federalization and democratization of Russia.
Это тот путь, который я сейчас пытаюсь продвинуть в умах, во-первых, россиян, а в свободное от этого времени в умах западных политиков.
This is the notion that right now I am working to try to implant into the minds of Russians, first and foremost, and in whatever spare time I've got left from doing that, into the minds of Western politicians.
И если это удастся сделать, Россия на выходе не будет демократической, но она перестанет быть агрессивной.
And if I succeeded, if this succeeds, I should say, then the end point will be Russia will not be a democratic country, but it won't be an aggressive one.
Это моя задача на ближайшие, на оставшийся кусок жизни.
Anyway, this is the task that I have before me for whatever time I have left on this earth.
Thank you.
Great. Well, the warning is there. 5 to 10 more years of Vladimir Putin. Our policymakers, our Congress, our decision makers need to wake up to this reality and start planning, planning accordingly. Thank you so much for being so open and candid with us today and so insightful. And I wish you the best of luck with your work and what you're doing. It's important work, and we are supporting you here around Washington and also at Hudson Institute. And Liam, thank you so much for joining us today and coming up with this idea of doing this event. So I would like to thank our online viewers for tuning in today. And I would like to thank our in-person audience for joining us. If you're interested in more of the work that we are doing here at Hudson, you can find it on hudson.org. And please join me thanking our two guests today.